So from the height of that music to just mere words, I'm afraid. But the transition is in a little book. I hope many of you were able to go to the Blake exhibition at the Tate Gallery. That's last few months, and it's extremely moving. And there are images in that somehow have followed me through my life since the teenage years. Somewhere in the back of my mind, what Blake was trying to achieve has been there as an inspiration. And it's wonderful to see that recognition. Man who was considered mad, impotent in the civilization or society of Great Britain, a sort of fringe figure, coming back into his own. The same with Bach. Just to think that music was ignored. It was only Felix Mendelssohn in the middle of the 19th century who brought this back, the beauty and the necessity of the music we've just heard. We forget. Through the course of our evolution and the development of culture and civilizations, we also forget. And things have to come back in their own time. And that's a sort of lesson of life, really. If you're an activist trying to change things, there's the right time. And sometimes you have to be very patient. And it can be very frustrating. But then suddenly the doors open, the windows open, and one finds you're standing there at the right time, the right person at the right time. And then something new can come, something regenerative. So this little book, which I treated myself to once again, and notice it's the songs of innocence and experience, not the poems of innocence and experience, because Blake set them to music, which is long lost. But I'd just like to start with a few verses from one of them. And remember, this is the actual size of these little books, because, of course, the whole thing is full of child nature, childhood, encompasses all these poems, this perception that Blake had of what it means, in essence, to be a child. So this is from the Divine Image, and I'll just read the first 3 verses. To mercy, pity, peace and love, all pray in their distress. And to these virtues of delight, return their thankfulness. For mercy, pity, peace and love is God our Father dear. And mercy, pity, peace and love is man his child and care. For mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. I'm going to read it again. I think with poetry there's a resonance, like a vibration, so I'll read it once more. To mercy, pity, peace and love, all pray in their distress. And to these virtues of delight, return their thankfulness. For mercy, pity, peace and love is God our Father dear. And mercy, pity, peace and love is man, his child and care. For mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. Today is, of course, the winter equinox, the longest night, the shortest day. And in 4 days, we enter into Christmas Day. And in that intervening period of 4 days, the light begins to get stronger. Perceptibly, especially in the ancient times, people were aware of that transformation of the light entering into the darkness and overcoming it. And therefore we have this Christmas celebration, this Christmas event, the birth in the Christian tradition of the Christ child. But look at it at its essence. It's amazing. I always come back to this every Christmas in my thoughts. The child. We come back to the child as the center of our attention. And why? What is it that this child brings? Look at the faces of parents of a newborn child. What happens? Radiance. If you look at their faces, what the child brings to us is a form of radiance, a light, like the sun, the strength of the light, the strength of love, the strength of rebirth, the strength of regeneration. This brings a warmth into our lives, and you just see it when anybody comes towards a baby, a newborn baby. There's such that potential, that uniqueness, that special. And we find it beautiful. Maybe objectively it doesn't look beautiful, but we find beauty in it. And that's the beauty of the soul. I'm a grandparent. And I must say, when I'm with my little grandchildren playing, I'm in the presence of something much greater than just the physical corporeality and their beauty as children. You feel, as you leave at the end of the day when you visited them, in the presence of something bigger than oneself. And I think that's very much that Christmas sense. Because as I said, it's a very old festival, this regeneration in the midwinter, the midnight hour. It's coming of light, but transformed into focusing on the child. And I think this is something we really have to carry in our hearts. There's this wonderful, wonderful image when Gabriel comes to Mary at the Annunciation. And it says, and she pondered it in her heart. She pondered it in her heart. And this is what we've heard already this morning, this quality of heart thinking, heart forces, that we, or us, or whoever inspired by Waldorf education is trying to bring back that light, that warmth, that heartfulness that in many educational systems that are anachronistic from the past, that still permeate what we think education is about, tend to destroy. It's arid. And our children then, in a way, suffer, may be too big a word, but nevertheless, something is lost. How do we bring these heart forces back into our work? This Christmas theme, and it's a wonderful time now, these 12 days just to reflect and ponder, like Mary, on what that actually means, how we work with our children, but not just how we work with our children, but how our children work with us. And I would like to stress that. It's reciprocal. It's a relationship. It's not one-sided. The old child-serving, child-saving aspect was strong in the last century, in the 19th century, or in Dickens or whatever. But now it's very different. Now we're waking up to an understanding that the children are the co-creators of our world. They're not just the objects of our attention. We are the objects of their attention. And they are citizens in their own right. They are our partners. They educate us, not just thinking that we can serve them as adults with experience and university degrees or teacher training, whatever we want to call it. No. If you really are an educator, what is what the children bring to you as well. It's a relationship. There was a wonderful phrase by Martin Buber, very, very simple, but very profound. In the beginning is relation. In the beginning is relation. And everything we learn, everything we absorb from what is around us, from our culture, from our co-participants, our co-human beings in the world, is built on relationship. Even the very words we use or the music we listen to is all to do with relation. In the beginning is relation. And this is a core element, core principle we should keep alive in us when we work with children in so-called schools. So that's what I'd like to develop a little bit and use a few examples from the practice in Steiner schools. Christmas, the image is of the three kings and the shepherds. And Steiner spoke about this in a wonderful way. I'd just like to quote a little bit from Rudolf Steiner because he says it better than me. What must never be forgotten is that the proclamation to the shepherds and to the kings contained a message for all mankind, humankind. For the earth is common to all. In that the revelation to the shepherds was from the earth, it was a revelation that may not be differentiated according to nationality. And in that the Magi received the proclamation of the sun and the heavens, that too was a revelation destined for all humankind. For when the sun has shone upon the territory of one people, it shines upon the territory of the another. The heavens are common to all. The earth is common to all. And I think that's part of our struggle today. Finding this universal human, or the one human, as you put it in the book, on your book on education, this universal human. How do we develop that across the world and at the same time respect everybody's individuality, everybody's difference? We're all part of this mosaic of humanity. All different colours, little tesserae, each of us, with our own reflection of light and colour. But how do we create it as a common picture of one? So at this point, I just want to show you one picture up there, a slide from Leonardo da Vinci, 1481. He did it when he was young. He was in Florence and he wasn't finished. He went to Milan and he left an unfinished picture. But I think it's one of the most beautiful pictures. Could we diminish the lights a little? It's not one that crowds stand in front of, like the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. But in its very incompleteness, Leonardo is giving us a deep meditation. Leonardo is a meditative painter. He painted so carefully. And he stands there at that cusp between medieval and the modern times, at that transition. He looks back to the thoughts of the Middle Ages and looks ahead to the scientific consciousness of today. And he stands there in a way torn between the two. And this picture shouldn't be finished. In a way, it speaks much more to us than it would be if it had been finished. If he could ever do it, that's the question one has to ask. Could this ever be completed? But because it's not completed, it's always in the process of becoming. And that's a major theme, I think, in education, that this becomingness of humanity is exposed in the school, in the classroom when you're working with children. They are in the process of becoming, and so are we. This constant becoming. And the same when you think of a school. A school too, it's a network of relationships. It's never complete. It's always in the process of becoming. Each day is a becoming day. If you work in a classroom, there's always something different, something new, another challenge, another evolution in the relationships between the children, between you and the parents, between you as a teacher, between the parents. There's always this becoming quality, this evolutionary spiritual element that weaves into all our communities, of which we are very often unaware. So this picture is one of becomingness. And you notice the three kings. They throw themselves on the ground in a triangle. And it's almost Baroque. They sort of throw themselves. They don't stand there as dignified, proud, omnipotent politicians or kings. They are humble. They bow down to the child, but in a very dramatic, unbalanced gesture. 1, 2, 3. And if you look at this side, right next to me here, there's a young man. And he's saying, come into the picture. Join me. Come in. And that's a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. Not looking out proudly, I painted this, like you see in Botticelli and others. Look at me, I'm a great artist. No, come in. Join me. And with his gesture of his hands, in Italian art you always have to look at hands, to speak with their hands. You bring you into the picture. Join me. And then if you follow it around, there's this huge semicircle of turbulence behind the three kings. Things in a sort of chaotic state. And if you go round from that side, you come to the other end on the right side. And what you find there? The old man. Pensive, thinking. So the activity of youth travels through the biography of life and becomes, hopefully, the wisdom, the stillness, the contemplation, which brings all the turbulence to the stop. And these are the forces of the astral body. These are the forces of our feelings, our soul life, that never stand still, that never stop. There's always this transformation, daily, hourly, this transformation of our feeling life, our emotional life about ourselves. And Leonardo puts it around the child. Human biography, age, time, emotions, relationships. Look at the different relationships between them all. And in the center, Mary, Isis, Maria, Sophia. Yes, she sits there with her child, and the child is active. It's not like Michelangelo, where the child turns back to his mother and says, I don't want to be on the world. There's too much suffering. And the mother doesn't let the child to go. She holds him back from following his own life in Michelangelo. Here we see the active child, and it reaches into the world, reaches out. But in that reaching out, it's unbalanced. It loses its balance. And what does the mother do? She compensates for it. Imbalance, balance. Perpetual motion, the story of our lives. That we swing between these two qualities in the center of that picture. And even though imbalanced, it brings a stillness which is echoed in the tree. And behind, typical of Renaissance like an iconography, the past. The decayed ruins of the past. And then what's coming towards us is the new. The rebirth, the beginning. This Christmas spirit. This sense of rebirth, whether we call it the birth of Christ, or a bodhisattva, or an imam, or a messiah, that's irrelevant. But it's in the child that this rebirth is manifest. Thank you. So, when we start the day in the Waldorf school, the children say a verse, just as you've been together with the meditation. We do the same in the school, bringing the children together, taking a breath from their travel, from their car journey, from the bus, from being at home, from all of that. Just at this moment, we're all together. And then we start our day. And I'll read you the first two lines of the verse that we say with the children all over the world. The first two lines, from when they're up from the first class to when they're the age of 10. The sun with loving light makes bright for me each day. The sun with loving light makes bright for me each day. And when they come to about the age of 10, 11, the verse changes. And it goes to first two lines. I look into the world where in there shines the sun. Because of course what's happening, this child development, this waking up of the intellect. I look into the world where in there shines the sun. Where for the younger child, the sun with loving light. This absorption of what is in the world around them. And I think they're very important themes. And if we look at other great educators as well, we find this respect for the child is something that's grown in the 20th century. Janos Korczak, wonderful Polish pedagogue, who went to his own death with his children of his orphanage in Warsaw. He went to Treblinka because they were Jewish, the Jewish ghetto. They were led off, and he went with them voluntarily to die with the children of his orphanage. Wonderful educational thinker, and actually very important later, as you learn. And he said, find your own way. Learn to know yourself before you try to know children. It is a mistake to believe that education is a science of children and not of man. You yourself are the child whom we must learn to know, rear, and above all, enlighten. And I think that's wonderful, that this said, well, we all still have a child nature. And I'm not talking about individual biographies with all our ups and downs and traumas and joys, but the child nature that we can still revive and find in ourselves as we work in a spiritual way and work on our own souls. This child quality that is exhibited in this Christmas time, we should think of finding the childhood in ourselves. And in the work I do, I find it's extraordinary. You know, in such a divided world, when we have goodwill for children, they unite us. That's their gift. When I sit in a room with academics and pedagogues from all different backgrounds and philosophies and disciplines and names and whatever, name tags from wherever, focus on the child and we suddenly understand each other. We may use different words, but nevertheless, as something enters the room, something comes in. This is what the children bring us. At the moment, then we begin to understand each other. Perhaps not very well, but there's something in common. We can find that common humanity through the agency of goodwill for children. And I've experienced this again and again with politicians in Brussels, where I've been working for many years. Same thing. As soon as you enter into that realm of focusing on the child, we suddenly understand each other. We can give each other something that otherwise would often be walled off, walled garden. And Maria Montessori put it like this about the little child. Adults admire their environment. They can remember it and think about it, but the child absorbs it. The things he sees are not just remembered, they form part of his soul. He incarnates in himself all in the world about him that his eyes see and his ears hear. So the child absorbs the world, and you can see how, like a sponge, as Steiner says, the world enters into them. That's what being a child is like. But how can you find that childhood nature in yourself as an adult? The difference is, of course, for the child, it's unconscious. It happens, unless they've been abused or terrible things, cruelty that take childhood away, like a criminal offense to steal a child's childhood. It happens. But if children are given that security, that love, that surrounding, they can absorb the world into their souls. It becomes part of them, unconsciously. As adults, we have to find it consciously. That's the work, to do it consciously. We are not children. We should not become childlike, but we should re-find those qualities of childhood that can help us live together better. And one of those qualities is wonder. To be able to wonder, to find the world wonderful, which the children have. Their nature, I see it in my grandchildren's eyes. It's all wonderful. The wish to join the human species is so strong in them. Yeah, I want to be here. I want to be part of this world. This young child with their eyes and their imagination and their play, sense of wonder. And that's the openness that Montessori is speaking about. And I think we need it too. This is the healing. This is the element of healing that our world so desperately needs. How do we regenerate, resuscitate this sense of wonder in ourselves, this sense that we can live through our imaginations and see the world as loving, the loving Son that speaks to us, that speaks to our heart. And surely, this is what school should be about. Surely the joy that comes in the Blake poems, this childhood nature, should be what creates the way the relationship, the educational or pedagogical relationship with children, and not something we say, that's just your private life. Yeah, you need to know the facts, you need to pass exams, you need to do this. Yeah, it's more this sense of how can we rebuild that? Because if you're a teacher, those moments when you're really with the children are like a huge nourishment. They last for years. I can still remember the classroom, the children, and that moment doesn't last long. It's homeopathic. The world is full of tensions and difficulties and obstacles and challenges and misunderstandings, of course. But those moments when somehow wonder entered into the souls of everybody in that room at that time can be an inspiration for years and an encouragement in a profession that's being discouraged in many respects, professionally discouraged through the systems, the policies, etc. that are following us. There was a Jewish rabbi, Herschel, who spoke about the sense of wonder. He did it in a rather special way, where he tried to rebuild that sense of wonder as underlying the way we could work together. And he speaks about Sophia, this wisdom. How shall we ignore the mystery in which we are involved, into which we are attached by our very existence? How shall we remain deaf to the throb of the cosmic that is subtly echoed in our souls? The most intimate is the most mysterious. Wonder alone is the compass that may direct us to the pole of meaning. The throb of the cosmic. We've just heard it early this morning. The throb of the cosmic. And this is where that wonder, he says, you can resuscitate that wonder. Wonder alone is the compass that may direct us to the pole of meaning. In a cynical world, this may sound very abstract and removed from reality, but of course it's not. It's the essence of our souls. And we can absorb that from the lessons our children teach us. But we can also find these lessons in daily life. Often unexpected. You don't have a business plan for wonder. Yeah? It comes in spontaneously. It appears like play. The spontaneity of playfulness and creativity. They appear. They come. If one prepares oneself or struggles, whatever, there are moments when something happens. So I'm going to read you another poem. This is by a Swedish poet called Thomas Tranströmer. He won the Nobel Prize for Poetry. Very important voice in Sweden. And he describes going on a tourist trip to Italy. And it's hot and sticky and mid-afternoon, and you're feeling a bit tired, and you go into a church. And this church, he calls it the Romanesque Cathedral. And that's important, that the style of architecture, because Romanesque is not Gothic. Gothic architecture was born consciously at a time when, 13th century, when people felt they were becoming too materialistic. The church was the beginning of markets in the cities, the trading between cities, and the church was confronted with a sort of materialization. So what did they do? They built Gothic. Yeah, quite consciously. Thought out, we'll go up. So you walk into a Gothic cathedral and you go, the architecture goes, sort of hysterically upwards, away from this earth. Off you go, there's the spiritual world, somewhere up there. And these stones that float weightless above you, and you don't know how. But that 100 years of Romanesque didn't. A complete balance between verticality and levity and gravity. And then also this verticality, horizontal element. Perfect balance. And if you go into a Romanesque cathedral, you're meant to walk. You have to walk, because you can't see what's going on. Deliberately done, you walk. And you go through darkness and light. One moment you feel the weight of the building, next moment it's lighter. And that journey was the journey to Jerusalem. It was an inner pilgrimage. That's why it's called the ambulatory. You walk round it. So I just put that in, a bit of architecture. And the poem. Inside the huge Romanesque church, the tourists jostled in the half-darkness. Vault gaped behind vault. No complete view. A few candle flames flickered. An angel with no face embraced me and whispered through my whole body, "Don't be ashamed of being human. Be proud. Inside you, vault opens behind vault endlessly. You will never be complete. That's how it's meant to be." Blind with tears, I was pushed out onto the sun-seething piazza, together with Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Mr. Tanaka, and Signora Sabatini. And inside each of them, vault opened behind vault endlessly. Okay? The common humanity, this potential, this space to grow, this becomingness of every human being. Again. Inside the huge Romanesque church, the tourists jostled in the half-darkness. Vault gaped behind vault, no complete view. A few candle flames flickered. An angel with no face embraced me and whispered through my whole body, "Don't be ashamed of being human. Be proud. Inside you, vault opens behind vault endlessly. You will never be complete. That's how it's meant to be." Blind with tears, I was pushed out onto the sun-seething piazza, together with Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Mr. Tanaka, and Signora Sabatini. And inside each of them, vault opened behind vault endlessly. Beautiful poem. This lesson, this moment, this inspirational insight that came suddenly, and the angel with no face embraced me. When Rudolf Steiner speaks of the angels and the hierarchy of the angels, angeloi, archangeloi, he says if we look through human evolution, they took an interest in us. They were working to create us, to help us become what we are, especially in our physicality, in our body. But he then says, this is no longer true. They've lost interest. It's now up to us. We have to rekindle the interest of the angels. Through our soul spiritual striving, our soul spiritual searching, we have to rekindle their interest in us. Otherwise, they have left us. They are not guiding us anymore because they have completed that task, and now it's our responsibility. As in the Blake poem I read earlier, the human face, the human form, the human dress. It now comes to us. And of course, humans like security. But now we have to refine this way. And part of Steiner's inspiration in founding the Waldorf School was to do that. Because he spoke about these angels just a few days after the beginning of the first Waldorf school in Stuttgart, September the 7th, 1919, 100 years ago. He then went to Berlin, and he spoke in this way. Lectures called The Problems of Our Time, trying to understand what was going on, especially at that juncture at the end of the First World War, with all its horrors and gruesomeness and unnecessariness of slaughter, terrible crime to humanity. What could come out of that? And Steiner was speaking of we have to rebuild their interest. It's now up to us. But it's not particularly easy. And I think if we look at the educational elements that are living in our world today, we can see a great increase in mental illness, especially with young people. Yeah, and I think this is terribly sad that there was a report, if I can find it, that came out just a few days ago. Yeah, actually was a report from the National Health Service. We know already that 75% of mental illness starts at the age of 14. No, sorry, got that wrong. I'll start again. 50% begins at the age of 14 and 75% at the age of 18. So mental illness starts when our children are at school. So what do we do about it? If we know this, and it's known, what on earth are we doing in our schools? If we're seeing the incipient problems of these young adults in mental illness that is becoming more and more prevalent, how can we go on teaching and creating schools that we've had for a couple of 100 years? This has to change. It's not fair on the children. And just 2 days ago, the report from the National Health, State of the Nation, 2019, Children and Young People's Wellbeing. And one of the findings was that young girls are cutting themselves. It says here, yeah. Teenage girls are self-harming and struggling with emotional disorders. The most recent national health data puts the figure at 1 in 5 at the age of 19, more than 3 times the rate for boys. 1 in 5 girls are cutting themselves. This probably is underreported, this figure. You know, scars on arms and hearts. What are we doing? What do we think we're doing in our schools, in our classroom, when we just create more examinations, more tests, more stress, high-stakes testing, GCSEs, whatever we call them, taking away even the modular element that the children could do at home. It all becomes so stressful. And we're measuring. It's a tide of metrics. There's this wonderful Blake painting of Newton. I don't know if you know it, where Newton is bending down under the sea and he's got a pair of dividers. And he doesn't look up. He looks down and he's dividing the world with his dividers. Yeah. Or The Ancient of Days by Blake as well. This creator who creates everything with his dividers. Yeah, divider. That's the word. Yeah. Why? How can we bring about a transformation? And it's not easy, of course. Any change is difficult. But at least in Waldorf schools, we're struggling. And they're not perfect, because the Waldorf schools are becoming. They're becoming Waldorf schools. They are not Waldorf schools. They're becoming. This is so important as a consciousness. I am not a Waldorf school. I am not a Waldorf teacher. You always have to say, I am becoming. Just as we have to say, I am becoming a human being. I'm never complete. That's how it's meant to be. Remember the poem. Yeah. And the same applies to us as educators and workers with children. This humility to give human beings dignity, because we're all becoming. And that's just as applicable to children as it is to adults. But the dividers are there, and I know I'm running out of time a little bit, but I'll read you another poem. A bit shocking poem, actually. It's by D.H. Lawrence. Again, a very insightful, spiritual, insightful writer. And it's a hard poem. It's called Walk Warily. Walk warily, walk warily, be careful what you say, because now the sunderers are hovering around. The dividers are close upon us, dogging our every breath and watching our every step and beating their great wings in our panting faces. The angels are standing back. The angels of the kiss, they wait. They give way now to the sunderers, to the swift ones, the ones with sharp black wings, and the shudder of electric anger, and the drumming of pinions of thunder, and the hands like salt, and the sudden dripping down of the knife-edge cleaving of the lightning, cleaving. Though we are in the midst of the sunderers, the cleavers, that cleave us ever apart from one another, and separate heart from heart, and cut away all caresses with the white triumphance of lightning and electric delight. The dividers, the thunderers, the swift ones, blind with speed, who put salt in our mouths and currents of excitement in our limbs and hotness and then more crusted brine in our hearts. It is the day of the sunderers, and the angels are standing back. I think I'll spare you from reading that again, unless you'd like it. It's a bit strong, but wonderful, insightful. Yes, this fragmentation, these forces of fragmentation, and the forces of trying to create this unity. And that's, of course, what pervades in school life too. Yeah? Waldorf schools have their quarrels and their dissonances and their apartness and their misunderstandings and their disappointments. They're human institutions, very much like any other. But it's the way, it's a struggle. Paulo Freire, wonderful educationalist from Brazil, 1950s, 60s, wrote a book, The Education of the Oppressed, because he was very concerned about the inequality in Sao Paulan society. He was educational commissioner for Sao Paulo, a communist. It's often disregarded because he was a communist. But he said there are two types of schools. One is the banking education, banking, where you put things in, knowledge, and you take things out. You invest knowledge in children and memory, and then they're steered for life. But he said there's a second type of education. He called it the problem-causing education. Education that creates problems. And he said that's the real thing. That's the real education, because it recognizes our nature of becoming, that we don't know all the answers. And answers change over time anyway. It's the questions that count. And this problem-creating education is what Waldorf schools are. Because it's all about development. It's all about constant evolution in yourself as an adult as well as with the children. The children are naturally becoming. You see it in front of you. They're becomingness as they go through those ages of childhood and youth. But also school is about what's inside, the becoming inside. And that creates problems, huge dissonances, which we have to work with and solve. Yes, this whole astral quality in that picture. And of course, that's part of it. That's part of the struggle. That's a necessity. Yeah. But of course, it can be used by the forces of darkness, and is. And if we look at our world, we can see it quite strongly. And a prevailing quality. Just think of global warming. I don't know if people have read The Uninhabitable Earth. Anybody? Just out, David Wallace Williams, amazing. Looking at climate change, what it's actually doing. And he points out that heat creates wars. Heat, when the environment becomes hot, that we're more likely to enter into conflict. This is, again, scientific, whatever. But also look at the pictures of Australia on our television sets. The heat. Where is the loving sun? Where's it gone? as the climate heats up, and we can see this is causing tremendous, more and more greater problems. Cities will have to be evacuated that are low-lying, the sea level is rising, the sea is becoming more acidic, water becomes scarce, conflicts arise for resources, migration, mass migration, these whole big movements in the world. A lot are there with the climate and the warming up of the earth through our own agency. Yeah. Or another aspect, our technology. Yes, Homo Deus by Hariri, the Israeli historian, was a military historian, and then he began to look at the world differently. Instead of looking at the world as a sequence that sort of progresses, he looks at what went wrong, what's underneath history that we don't recognize as regress rather than progress. And he looked at our present state and he said, well, if we look at humanism, there's always this belief that your inner experience has a value, that what you experience in life has a value. But when we go to data, when we create data, whether it's on an iPhone with a photograph or whatever we're creating data, that becomes more important than our inner experience. As though we haven't lived life unless it's become data. And it's an unconscious quality that we have. Always data, more data. This is what's pervading education, the PISA studies, for instance. Yeah, more and more data about children's learning, education, what they're doing at school, what their achievements are, what their marks are, what the teacher has taught, ranking. The metric tide takes over, and it can take away from the forces of the heart. Where, as I said earlier, teachers feel deprofessionalized, devalued, and all we become are numbers. And we can see where that will lead, as we can see in China, yeah, with facial recognition, yeah. Where I just read where if people go to a pop concert, everybody is photographed, and they can catch criminals they're looking for in the big crowd through facial recognition. You get on a train, your face is photographed. Everything you do, facial recognition, everything becomes an algorithm, a data. And this has the danger, in spite of the wonders of the technology, which I, like everyone else, use a lot. Nevertheless, behind it there lurks this quality that takes away from our heart humanity if we're not careful, if we're not asleep. And Steiner speaks about this as a mechanization of the soul. Yeah? That we become mechanized. And we live in this mechanism, because it provides, it gives us so much, yeah? Whether we're in the health service or whatever, with the machines and all the things that are possible now that weren't in the past. Yes, of course, it's a gift, a technological gift. But what's the negative side? Another thinker was, I can't pronounce his first name, but his name was Bauman. He was Polish, Zbigniew Bauman. He was professor at Leeds. And he wrote an essay, Whatever Happened to Compassion? Where's empathy? Where is compassion? And he said, look at the world we live in now. It all comes into our faces through our technology. He said, our technology is an artificial eye. In the Middle Ages, if you saw suffering, it was there in front of you. And you had a choice. You gave charitably or you walked past. The suffering, where people had leprosy or beggars or whatever, they were there in front of your face in the Middle Ages. But now it's all removed from us. It's on a screen. We see this endless suffering in places like Syria or Libya. Yeah, it goes on, the suffering. He said, what does that do to our souls to see it? It makes us feel like we're voyeurs. We look at it and we're distant. And he said, what's the remedy? We have to create, he said, artificial arms. We have artificial eyes, but how do we create arms through art? Artificial, meaning through the art of making an embrace of our fellow human beings. And Bauman says that's our next task from the heart, that to balance the technology, which we cannot wish away, which we could use with wisdom, if we wanted, if we could, if we learn how to do it, then we create these arms. And that's the embrace you saw in the picture. That moment where Mary holds the unbalanced child. With her knee, she just balances it out with affection and love. And the thing then is brought back to a harmony in the midst of this chaos around us. So I think I'm meant to come to an end. I'd just then like to finish with one thing, if I may. I want to read something from a cellist, Pablo Casals, the great cellist, Spanish cellist, Catalonian, I think he would say. Yes, he would. He would have said Catalonian cellist. Interesting man. He was a freedom fighter in his own way with his cello, because he would not play for any country that recognized Franco as the dictator of Spain. One exception. Kennedy, J.F. Kennedy. He played for J.F. Kennedy because he saw something there, a newness, an openness. And so he conceded at that point and played it once in the White House. But otherwise he wouldn't. So I'm just going to read you a little passage to finish on now. Each second we live in a new and unique moment of the universe. A moment that never was before and will never be again. And what do we teach our children in school? We teach them that 2 and 2 makes 4 and that Paris is the capital of France. When will we also teach them what they are? We should say to each of them, do you know who you are? You are a marvel. You are unique. In all the world, there is no other child exactly like you. In the millions of years that have passed, there has never been another child like you. And look at your body. What a wonder it is. Your legs, your arms, your cunning fingers, the way you move. You may become a Shakespeare, a Michelangelo, a Beethoven. You have the capacity for anything. Yes, you are a marvel. And when you grow up, can you then harm another who is like you, a marvel? You must cherish each other. You must work. We must all work to make this world worthy of its children. That is the ethos that we in the Waldorf movement, but far beyond. I work with many educators because I've done research in social and emotional education all across the world in 21 countries, working for a Spanish organization, looking at all these questions of innovation and change in schools. But that's the common theme everywhere, where you find a regeneration, a respect for childhood. And if we can find that respect also in our own spiritual striving, I think that will help us try and redeem and bring health back to the societies in which we live today. So thank you.